Well, we read so much now about children being abused, and I happened to see a video, I think yesterday, about some of the young girls that have been abused and traumatized by the Epstein Island and all that surrounded it. And I didn't actually know that it was so many. And the thing is that I understood how the one girl felt. She said that she couldn't remember what had happened, that it was so terrible that she just couldn't remember. And this is a familiar thing for me. I know that when people are faced with an impending crash, like in the case of someone I know, that a driver in a truck coming the opposite way actually fell asleep and drifted onto the wrong side of the road. And so this man I know that was involved in a head-on collision, he can remember nothing about that, as was these girls. And I studied up about that because it affected me. You have what's called compartmentalization, and that's when if a child is being abused, it can close off that part of the mind that contains those memories. In other words, it has a mind that is like a filing cabinet, and those memories that are too traumatic to look at get filed in a different drawer, so to speak. Well, so why does it mean anything to me other than to be sympathetic to someone who has suffered greatly, as all of those people obviously have? Well, on the last video, I actually touched on the fact that I was born in 1939, and I was born in July, and sometime around, I think, September, the Second World War started. Now, just to mention, as an aside, that I was a middle child. I was born second in between my sister and my brother. And of course, anybody who's a second child will know that we got blamed for everything. So I just want to make it clear that I'm not responsible for starting World War II. Okay? So, once it started, in Manchester, where I was born, they had what was called a Christmas. I understand they had the Christmas Blitz, and it happened around Christmas, and the Germans sent a great number of bombers over, and Manchester was particularly hard hit. Now, during that time, I was actually evacuated as an infant to somewhere safer, obviously probably during that time of the Blitz. But I didn't stay there because I remember that my parents told me that my mother worked at Dunlop's, the munitions factory, and my father, who was actually virtually deaf, he had a hearing aid which was so ancient it should have been perhaps one of those hearing trumpets, but it helped a little. And I stayed with him. Now, from the door of our house, we could see the air raid shelter, which was a big concrete and brick block house in its most basic form. It just had forms, places to sit on either side in what was really like a tunnel inside all of these 2 or 3 feet thick walls and huge concrete roof. And apparently I used to be with my father during that time. So I'm still an infant and would have just been approaching, perhaps 1 year old. But I knew the sound of the sirens. Now, before any air raid, before the bombers come over, there would be a siren. Never been able to listen easily to sirens even now. But my father wouldn't hear that, but I would. And I knew enough to make a noise. And my mother always used to say that I went, "Whoa," like this, that I could hear it. And my father would take me to the shelter and we would go in that shelter. Now, evidently, bombs were falling all around because I remember coming out of the shelter in my later years when I was getting on for 3 and 4 and seeing houses that were close by us that had been bombed and playing in those houses too. And in fact, seeing where the family had been evacuated and just left everything. So there would be places that the ornaments were still there and cups and saucers that still had tea in them. Very, very strange. But as per what I was trying to explain at the beginning of the video, I didn't remember any noises of bombs going off. Now, I know that Manchester was hit. They sent about 40, the Germans sent about 4, I know this historically now. They sent about 45 or 47, something like that, of the what we used to call doodle bugs or buzz bombs. And these would make that noise. It was a jet, it was a V1 jet, and they would put a calculated amount of fuel into the jet and launch it, and it would fly. So it was a bomb on wings, but unmanned, and it would fly in the direction it was aimed, and it would fly, and I think about 10 or 15 or possibly 25 of these bombs landed in Manchester. And I remember that was the terrifying thing about those bombs, was that you would hear the sound. So you would hear them buzzing, and then it would stop. And the waiting after it stopped to where it landed told you whether you were going to die or not. Now, have to understand that much of what I do remember of that time was told to me in conversations, being told by my mother and by my father what happened, and filling in blanks. I remember that my mother worked in Dunlop's. She worked in the munitions factory, and they used to make these. They always looked like baby elephants to me, but they were barrage balloons, and they were tethered on heavy cables to great lumps of concrete, great blocks of concrete, which would stop them flying away. And they would launch these things, and they would fly above the town. They would fly above the streets, and they would stop bombers. They would be tethered at a height that would stop bombers and enemy aircraft from getting too close, and it was a deterrent. Now, my mother her job while she was there at Dunlop's was to spray these things, and that was part of her job. And I remember that she told me what it was like when there was an air raid, because they were deemed safe at Dunlop's. It was heavily fortified, I assume. And she told me that when there was an air raid and the all clear, in other words, another siren was sounded, and the all clear would be sounded. Now, they would have people, they had wardens whose job it was to go around making sure that no lights were showing in the houses and stuff like that. And they would radio in on a general network, and they would tell the heads or that person whose job it was to go on the PA. They would tell him what streets had been hit, and women like my mother, who had families at home. And as I told you, I remember we lived at 20 Tamworth Street. I don't think it's there anymore, but just around the corner, less than, I would say, 100 yards, the house was completely bombed. And I played in that house afterwards like an adventure playground. I never really thought anything of it. Well, my mother would know this, and it never happened to her, but she said that she remembers on the intercom, the PA, the loudspeaker in the factory, after the raids, the women would stand there by their bench or whatever their workplace station was, and they would listen. And the voice would come over the loudspeaker and it would say which homes, maybe not which homes, but which streets had been bombed. And if it was a very small street that was mentioned, then the women would know that probably their family had been killed. So my mother explained how women would faint at their station, and they would be allowed to go home, of course. So these were extremely terrible times, but because of the compartmentalization, I can't remember any of the terrible times. But I know what my mother and father have told me. My father, this is what my mother told me. My father was called up when the war started, and my mother said that he went off to the place where they were doing the examinations, not examining for intelligence, they were examining for fitness. And the family waited and waited. My sister was 7 years older than I was, so she would have been about maybe 8 years old. And we waited until my father came home. And my father came home and he was clutching a paper in his hand, which was from the recruiting station. And he told my mother that he'd failed. And when she asked him why, he said, "I've got TB." And TB was a killer then. The treatment of it had not really been found. So it was really a virtual death sentence that he had received. And he sat with his head in his hands, not quite knowing what to do. And my mother said, "Let me look at the paper." And she looked at the paper and she said, "You silly bugger, this is not yours. This is somebody else's paper." My father took the paper and he ran all the way back to the recruiting station. But it turned out that his hearing was not good enough. So he failed anyway, but at least he didn't have he didn't have a death sentence. But I remember lots of things that I learned during that time. My father used to pick up these magazines which were very clear on not how the war was going particularly, but what it entailed. Like there were fighter planes on both sides. The most famous, probably one of the most famous planes ever, was the Spitfire. And my father swears to me in later years that he watched a dogfight overhead between a Spitfire and a German fighter that had escorted the bombers that came over. I remember reading. Do I remember hearing them? No. And yet we always, as kids, played at bombers. And when we dropped the bombs, they were always the German screamer bombs. The bombs that the Germans invented were terrifying, and that's what they were made for, to strike terror into the heart of people and demoralize them. And the bomb, on the way down, the bomb would, I can't do it, the bomb would open like this, and it would drop out lots of little tiny bombs like this, maybe not quite as small as that, but they were incendiary bombs, and they would set the place on fire. And the Great Blitz of London was very much like that. It was fought on that basis, that those kind of incendiary bombs set London ablaze. And that was a particularly terrifying time, because it meant that those who were fighting the fires, they would go and they would know that if more bombs were dropped, they would be able to be seen, because the places that they were going to fight and help people were ablaze, so they would be very visible from the air. So there were many things which I still don't remember. But during that time, when troops were being called up, there was one particular woman who became incredibly important to all of the soldiers. She was the force's sweetheart, and her name was Vera Lynn, and she was a singer, and she sang a song called "We'll Meet Again," and the words are extremely emotive, because they were sung by every soldier when soldiers were being called up and they were going to the train. Don't forget, no phones. My mother didn't have a phone for many, many years into my adulthood. But it always seemed to me that this song would have been almost the same as emotive if it wasn't sung, if it was spoken. We always saw that there were on this, not by television, because we didn't have television then, but we'd hear on the radio, and we would see on a newsreel when we went to the movies, and we would see fresh-faced youngsters, 18 years old and a little more, and they would be boarding trains and saying goodbye to their loved ones, and some of them would be making that final phone call. And I thought then that song would actually could be seen as the last phone call of a young man to his mum. So I'll do my best to say that because it still has a huge effect on me. But back then, you went into a phone box, and it was a small thing that was made mostly for one person, but could contain two people. But it would be one, and there would be a line outside that box at the station where all of the guys would be yelling and cheering and thinking that it was all going to be fun and it was going to be over. And of course, those that were being left behind would know that they might not see them again. And I imagine the boy who calls his mother, in those days, it was a big black box, and it had button A and button B, and you put your money in 4 pennies, and you put your money in, and you waited until the other person picked up the phone, and then when they did, you pressed, I think, button A, if I can remember, and the money, the 4 pennies, which were huge things, were huge coins, and they would drop into the box and you would be connected. And someplace, somebody was taking a cable like this and putting it in somewhere on what was called the switchboard. But we never called our mothers mum. Nobody ever called her mummy. We called her mam. And that boy would be calling his mam, and he would have put the money in, and he'd be holding it to his ear, and he would be waiting for his mother to pick up. His mother would know that it was going to be him and what was going to happen during that phone call, that he was going to tell her that he was about to leave. So the coins drop, and he hears her voice. Hello, ma'am. It's me. Look, we'll meet again. Don't know where. Don't know when. But I know we'll meet again. Some sunny day. Keep smiling through. Just like you always do. Let the blue skies drive the dark clouds far away. And won't you please say hello to the folks that I know? Tell them I won't be long. They'll be happy to know that as you saw me go, I was singing this song. We'll meet again. Don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. Keep smiling through, just like you always do. Let the blue skies drive the dark clouds far away. And won't you please say hello to the folks that I know? Tell them I won't be long. They'll be happy to know that as you saw me go, I was singing this song. We'll meet again. Don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. Keep smiling through, just like you always do. Let the blue skies drive the dark clouds far away. And won't you please say hello to the folks that I know? Tell them I won't be long. They'll be happy to know that as you saw me go, I was singing this song. We'll meet again. Don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. And that would be the end of the most difficult kind of phone call.